welcome to Creative Mornings. This is our fifth event, one of those. Glad you all can make it here, and thank you to Davenport for hosting us in this spot. It's beautiful. We're glad to be here. So there's some fun things that have been happening kind of behind the scenes for Creative Mornings. Adobe came on as our sponsorship, and I have a whole thing I need to read, so give me 1 second. Adobe Creative Mornings is new global partner. Adobe recognizes the importance of Creative Mornings and being part of that global ecosystem of creativity, and they're committed to reaffirming their support of creatives all around the world. Adobe used to be a partner pre-pandemic and helped start Creative Mornings, but just recently came back on and announced this at Adobe Max just a couple months ago. You can actually go and watch the whole talk. Tina, the founder of Creative Mornings from the New York chapter, came on the stage at Adobe Max in Miami and gave a whole beautiful talk. You can go to adobe.max.com/online, something like that. If you just go to Adobe Max, it'll pop up. This partnership, was announced on stage twice by the founder, the partnership of the magic behind Creative Mornings. Local partners. So we did partner with Davenport to be here today. And then Java Burrito is our lovely coffee sponsor today. So definitely go give them some love from the Creative Mornings team. Bring a friend. Most of you are here probably because somebody reached out and said hello, or you saw us on Instagram. We have more events coming up. They're planned every month, so bring people back. They don't have to be creative necessarily, but anyone that can benefit from a loving community like us is definitely welcome. So for those who haven't met me, my name is Luke. I'm an animator here, designer and animator, and now printmaker here in Savannah. Been here about 2 years, going on 3 years, and I've loved it. Creative Mornings has been a huge thing for me to get more involved and help build a community, that's me. We have some lovely volunteers. We have some new faces hopping in, and they're here today, which is great. We have Noah, who's our photographer, Mariah, who's kind of helping the admin side of things, Kristen, who's our social media manager and extraordinary person, and then Robert, who's helping with video today. If you would like to volunteer or get involved, you can go to send an email or hit me up on Instagram. And then donations. Anything you guys would like to donate just goes back into this. Helps it run, covers cost of things like fancy clickers and projectors and whatnot. Field trips. Creative Mornings has field trips, which is kind of like this, but online. They're all over the world. They host different types of classes and stuff that you can go on and see. You can go to Creative Mornings field trips and see those. They have them all the time. Wonderful different types of topics and speakers. Those are fantastic. Creative Mornings is a global organization. We are in 69 different countries. Nice. 243 chapter cities. A lot of talks online and over 13.7 million views, which is fantastic. Creative Mornings has a manifesto. This is the core beliefs that all of Creative Mornings tries to live up to. And we can all read this together. No, I'm just kidding. Everyone is creative. Creative life requires bravery and action, honesty, and hard work. We are here to support you, celebrate with you, and encourage you to make the things that you love. We believe in the power of community. We believe in giving a damn. We believe in face-to-face connections and learning from others in hugs and high fives. We bring together people who are driven by passion and purpose, confident that they will inspire one another and inspire change in neighborhoods and cities around the world. Everyone is welcome. Everyone is creative. Next month's speaker, Autumn Gary. She's a fantastic artist, sculpture work extraordinaire, has some pieces up at the Telfair that you can go check out now. Date to be determined, but if you subscribe to the newsletter and Instagram or Facebook, that will be coming. Creative Mornings theme this month is thread. It was chosen by the Derby chapter in the United Kingdom, which is super cool, illustrated by Car D, and was presented by our global partners at Adobe Max. And then there's some copy to go with that. Have you ever pulled on a loose thread in a sweater or a sock? Things that can unravel quickly. The creative process can feel like that. A nagging thought, an imperfect bit, or a big tangled mess. But maybe that thread is trying to tell you something. Follow it and see where it takes you. Because thread is both a physical, metaphorical tool of creativity. In film and literature, a thread is the progression of a plot line or a theme that helps tie the narrative together. While sewing, weaving, embroidery, and knitting, a thread or a physical embodiment of that holds pieces together. No wonder a loose thread is so hard to ignore. It turns out that all the good and bad in your life is forming a beautiful tapestry. That's this month's theme. Danielle is going to be taking it over and talking about weaving a thread of community. So if everyone gives Danielle a wonderful round of applause.
All right. Hi, everybody. As Luke mentioned, my name is Danielle, and I'm the Executive Director of the Davenport House Museum. And how many of you have been to the Davenport House before? Okay, so we got a good many. How many of you have been in this space before? Okay, a few hands. Fantastic. So the first thing I want to do is start off with sharing just a little bit about kind of our base history and our team. Davenport House was built in 1820 by master builder Isaiah Davenport for his family, and then the 13 enslaved workers also resided here in this space. We recently opened about a year, an exhibition in our basement floor that focuses specifically on the lives of the 13 enslaved workers that were here at the time. The building you are in now, well, this specific room, is our preservation center. So this was built about 2.5 years ago when the shop and the offices were moved from the basement of the Davenport House over to this building. This building, where the brick wall is, where you came in, is the historic Kennedy Pharmacy. So that was built in 1890 by Harbor Master Robert Kennedy, and it was used as a pharmacy originally for a while, but it has kind of a more varied and complex history. So Kennedy Pharmacy, Preservation Center, Davenport House, and across the square is the Sheftel Building, which is the headquarters for the historic Savannah Foundation, which oversees all of the Davenport House and the pharmacy. We are all kind of one large entity who all have kind of different missions. So that's a little bit of baseline of who we are. But today, thinking of the museum as a tapestry. So when Luke asked if I wanted to be the speaker for this month, and hearing that the theme was threads, even before that, I kind of have thought of the museum as a tapestry. It's made up of all of these different threads. So from our history, the artifacts, our staff, our stakeholders, our partners, our audiences, all of these things come together to kind of form the identity and what the museum is. And I'm going to be focusing kind of on 3 of those today. So the first one is our history, the second one looking at our spaces, and the third one is community. So thinking of our historical threads, we're a museum. We have an educational mandate. We have an educational mission to use our buildings, to use our history, to share with the public. And so specifically, I just went into a little bit about our buildings. Because we're a historic house museum, the actual structure is so much of the part of our story. So maybe more so than kind of an art gallery or another museum where you might go to, the structure itself is a part of that in a very unique way. Thinking of our historical figures, that's really the basis for everything. The people who lived in the house, what their lives were, all of their stories. And ours go much further than just the Davenports and even the enslaved workers. And we've begun to kind of expand out our stories about that. But those threads of all of those different individual people are very important to building up the larger story we tell at the house. And our interpretation is really, how do we share that story? What do we choose to share, and how do we choose to share it? So for a very long time, The house focused on just the story of the Davenports, sharing what a kind of slice of life was like in the 1820s, and then our preservation story. So in the 1950s, we had 7 ladies who banded together to save the Davenport house from the wrecking ball, and that's what really kicked off the preservation movement in Savannah, the formation of the Historic Savannah Foundation, and really kind of the reason why Historic Savannah looks the way that it does today and why it's preserved today. So that was our story that we told for many, many years. Recently, we've begun to explore our tenement era. So between 1820 and 1955, a whole heck of a lot happened in that house and in Savannah in general. And so I think a lot of the history we see and hear around Savannah is very rooted in our earlier time periods. But there is so much more to Savannah's history. And the way that we're digging into this is exploring our tenement era, which goes from about 1890 to 1955. So during that time, the house was a tenement. There were all kinds of people constantly moving in and living in the house in all levels. And so the story that we've chosen to really kick off this interpretation of the tenement era is the Chan family. So Robert Chan and his wife Annie lived in the house between 1901 and 1902, and they operated a Chinese laundry in the historic Kennedy Pharmacy at that very same time. And so we have kind of gone on this journey now to explore the Chan family's history, and not even just specifically their time in the house, but their kind of time in Savannah, what that looked like. What was it like for Robert Chan as one of the very first Chinese immigrants to come and settle in Savannah? What was his experience like? What was his wife's experience like? What was their children's experience like as a second generation Chinese Americans here in Savannah during the early 20th century? So really kind of pulling these new threads in to tell a different story, a more expansive story of the Davenport house. And also, not only just kind of getting these historical threads, but pulling them through to the present. Why does it matter? How do we make this relevant? I think we know that immigration is a bit of a hot topic in today's society, but it was a bit of a hot topic back then too. There was the Chinese Exclusion Act. It's always been kind of messy, and I think sometimes we lose sight of that now in the present, and we think that the present is the worst it's ever been or it ever will be, but people were messy back then. And I think having that connection to the past where you say, this wasn't so clean or just the sense of history of this is what happened, but it's much more nuanced than that. And these individual people's stories are where that kind of complexity can come out and what we're kind of dedicated to sharing. So the next kind of larger thread that I want to talk about are our spaces. And so kind of I mentioned all the buildings that we have, but back in March of last year, we were really struggling. What do we do with the historic Kennedy Pharmacy? That we know it's our shop, that we know it's the entrance to the Davenport House Museum, but what more can this space be and what more can this space do? And so what we decided was that the historic Kennedy Pharmacy would have its very own mission to support local Savannah artists and artisans. That's a little bit of a leap for a historical institution, for a historic house museum in particular. Why are we choosing to get involved in this space in particular? There was a market for it, that there are a lot of SCAD grads around. There are a lot of artists who maybe are associated with SCAD but have stayed here and are no longer in the SCAD system. We want to be supportive of that local artist community, hyper-local artist community. Being involved in the local community is very, very important to us. And there was an interesting opportunity here in this art space. And it's not so unconnected from the house. There are so many examples of beautiful artistry in the Davenport house, from the woodwork, the wallpaper, the plaster work, and then the actual pieces of art that would have been present during the Davenports, or all the art that the tenants would have chosen to put in the house too. There's that connection as well. And so we decided to have this space with its own mission, and it has been a beautiful, beautiful journey, getting to work with new artists, doing our monthly artisan workshop series. So in this space here, every month, we partner with a new artist or artisan. We have kind of a broad brush that we paint that term with, to host workshops, to get our visitors an opportunity to try their hand at something. It doesn't need to be, a 6-week course on intensive painting, but something where they can just come and try, and they can connect with people. They can connect with other members of the community in kind of a low stakes way where they get to learn something and they get to create something and they get to have that experience of creation here in this space. And so here we just have a few examples of events that we've had. We've had a tea tasting, a event where back in March we had 14 different women artists in this space here who are associated with our shop from the ages of like 20 to women in their 80s. So that was a very fun experience where everybody got to kind of like learn from each other there too. So our last thread, and I've talked a little bit about this, is our community partners, our stakeholders, our audiences. Those are all a little bit different, and the way that we interact with them and engage with them is all a little bit different. But one kind of larger thread that is running through all of this is opening up our space to new people. The average audience for Historic House Museum tends to be a bit older. It tends to be fairly white and fairly consistent in those who come to visit the museum, but a lot of tourists who come, it's a checkbox, even locals. Oh, I've been to the Davenport House, I've seen it. I don't need to go for another 20 years, or maybe my parents are in town and I'll take them back. We really want to turn that perception on its head. We want to be engaged with the local community. And so we've been doing this through kind of a variety of different ways. One of them is really trying to create more of a third space where people can come in. There's a low barrier to entry. They don't necessarily need to be interested in history or the house's history, but we can still welcome them into our spaces. So we've started a yoga in the garden program. So every Saturday we have a very kind of meditative, low impact yoga in our garden space. That is another tremendous boon to us, as the garden. The house, it can be a little difficult to do things in that space, but the garden is wonderful, and we have this beautiful space that we can invite people in. We've also been more focused on building connections with families. There's a lot in Savannah that's geared towards, the younger SCAD audience, students, maybe retirees who come here, but maybe those people in the middle don't always have a lot that they can do, and especially families, and creating intergenerational experiences to get kids into a museum environment so they're not afraid of museums, so they don't think, they're stuffy and boring. You can do fun things at museums, I promise. So really kind of working on cultivating that audience as well. And then again, really through our artist connections as well. That's opened up an entirely new community. You all as a new community for us, new people to invite into our space. So all of these different kind of community threads that we're building up to really change the perception of the museum itself, what we do, and how we act. Ways to get involved. So many ways to get involved. We have docents, so our main guided tours are done by docents. And so we have a docent training program that, if you were interested, you go through. Kristen, our lovely Kristen, leads that docent training. Just volunteering. We have a lot of new events now that happen that we love to have volunteers for. We had our fall festival about 2 weeks ago. We got close to 450 people through for that festival. So the more hands, the better to try to help facilitate those experiences. Our Artisan Spotlight series. If you are an artist and you would like to lead a workshop in our space, let us know, reach out to us. We can talk about that. Also being a featured artist in the shop at the Kennedy Pharmacy. We're always looking for new artists to partner with and sell their art in the shop. Or do you have another way that you think you'd like to be involved that we haven't thought of yet? We'd love to hear it, and we'd love to talk to you about that. We're always looking for kind of unique, different ways to get involved and expand our community. Just some contact information with us. We have the main line for the house, our website. Please also do follow us on Instagram. That's probably where we're most active, and you can find out about our events and everything that we do, or stop into the shop anytime. We'd be happy to see you. All right. Thank you. Thank you. Any questions
questions for Danielle Hodes?
Yeah. Yeah.
So I haven't seen the new basement space yet, so if this is explanatory by going into it, I apologize. But, I think something beyond the Owens Thomas House, I don't think there are a lot of cultural institutions here that are actually touching upon the history of the enslaved and what that meant for the houses here in Savannah. When you were approaching that project and building it out, what are some of the ways in which the Davenport House worked to get either expertise or guidance, or maybe you guys implemented different methods to make sure that you did that in the most appropriate and sensitive way possible? Because I think that's really interesting for, as you said, a community, organizations that have predominantly white folks working them, et cetera. Like, what was that experience like from your perspective, and what did you guys do?
Yeah, so I came in at the finish line for that project. I will definitely say that it was something that the museum had been working on for a very long time. And it wasn't until kind of those larger changes of renovating this space and moving everything over where they could go and physically implement it. That being said, towards the end when I did come in, just right before that, they had decided to work with Nicole A. Moore. So she is out of the Civil Rights Museum in Atlanta. She is absolutely amazing. I recommend everyone go follow her on all her things. But she specializes in the interpretation of slavery in historic spaces. And so she was brought in as kind of a, please check over everything that we are doing, everything that we are saying. And she did, I know, have significant edits to what we were doing. And I think it was incredibly important that they did end up bringing her in. And we actually brought her back, I want to say, when was that? In August? Yeah, to do a in-person training with our docents and our staff to make sure that we were doing our due diligence in interpreting that space, that we were doing it correctly. And having her there was so great. And getting her to it was even less about the way that we're presenting it to visitors that come through, but changing the way that we as docents and staff are thinking about the space, how the space would have been used, and our responsibility in interpreting that. So I think having this kind of continued dialogue with experts who are more informed about it than we are is really important. And another thing that we're looking to do is really platform different people and our community partners in that space. So in December, we are working with Pat Gunn. Does anyone know Pat? So Pat's also amazing. She led the charge to change the name of Calhoun Square to Susie King Taylor Square. She runs her own tour company, Underground Tours. She is a Gullah Geechee woman, and again, really focuses on Gullah Geechee culture and the interpretation of slavery all around Savannah. So she does walking tours, bus tours. She does pretty much everything. But she is coming in with her interpreters, and they are basically taking over the interpretation for that program that focuses on the Christmas as it would have been for the enslaved workers. And so, we can obviously talk about that as our staff here, but having her as a descendant in that space doing that interpretation means so much more and offers that level of authenticity of interpretation in that space that we want to continue building partnerships like that and being aware of, what we lack, what we can do, and how we can be more inclusive and bring in more of the community to also, use our platform to have them come in. So those are ways that we're continually working on that. Yeah.
I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about the Chan story, and about who Robert Chan is and what he did in Savannah, because I think you undersold it.
Okay, yes. So this has been my pet project for the past couple months. Uncovering this story, and I shouldn't even say uncovering necessarily, because I went back into our archives, and there were people throughout the institutional history who'd kind of looked into it a little bit, made mentions, it pops up here and there. But there wasn't ever really the institutional shift that we are implementing now to really expand the story. It was always 1820s. So when we got to doing more research, and we had an absolutely wonderful intern this summer, Sophia Heller, she came in and she did a significant amount of research into the Chan family. And being one of the very first immigrants to settle here, his story is at once kind of typical of what that Chinese immigrant experience was at the time, but also very atypical. There were more people settling in bigger cities, in Chinatowns. He actually came through San Francisco. He was going to New York, stopped through Savannah, and it was the year of the Great Fire where the Presbyterian church burned down. It was that day that the church was burning that he arrives in Savannah. He helps to extinguish the flames and immediately becomes a member of the church, and as a lifelong member, and decides to stay in Savannah, that this was kind of this, event where he felt like he needed to be here. He was incredibly politically savvy. He was socially savvy. He understood by joining the church. That was a way for him to get into Savannah society and be more accepted, even though he had a considerable outsider status as being a Chinese immigrant. He was able to integrate into society, make a name for himself, and that social savvy then carried on to his descendants as well. He had 6 children. One of them was Geraldine, or Gerald. She hated being called Geraldine. So Gerald Chan, she was an award-winning poet. She had her poems published in the New York Times and the Washington Post. She wrote prolifically for the Savannah Morning News, and when there was a Savannah Evening News. She was so smart in how she was an ambassador for her culture, but she was so deeply, truly Southern. She was born and raised in Savannah. She had a Southern accent like nobody's business. She would speak to church groups about her Chinese culture because women's groups, she knew getting in with the women in that way would make her and her family more accepted into society. The way that they were able to create this identity of engaging with their Chinese roots, but being very fully Southern, fully Savannian, leads to a lot of questions, I think, of the perception of who do we consider to be a Savannian? I think there's maybe a very Moonlight and Magnolias idea of what it means to be a Southerner, and this is kind of in stark contrast to that, but they were Southerners, they were Savannians. So I think being able to expand on this story and tell this story, and the fact that we have connections to the present. I've been working with one of the descendants, so Robert's granddaughter. She has recently published a memoir about her family, about their time in Savannah, and she has given us access to a whole trove of historical photographs of her family from about 1920 to 1940. So in January, we're going to be hosting an exhibition of those photographs in this room here. And so being able to really start to engage with that story historically, but also artistically through the photographs, is such a great opportunity for us. And again, expanding our community. We've never reached out to the Chinese community here. We've never been involved with them. And I'm very excited to have this opportunity. We're also partnering with the archives, that they are going to be doing an oral history project based on gathering stories from the Chinese immigrant and Chinese American community in Savannah, and that's not been done before. So I think this expansion of history, I'm very excited for us to be part of that. Sorry, that was a long, you just get me on my soapbox about it. Yes?
I love that you talked about using this as a third space, and the medium category that you talked about, young families is where we fall in, and same here. And so I just wondered if you could talk a little bit more about some of the ideas or programs or experiments that you want to try for young families.
Yeah, exactly. So I think part of it, and still for me and I think us to understand, is how do we meet you all where you are? Having kids in the house can be difficult. Having them in the garden, much easier. Having them in this space, there's not really anything they can do to this space. Are we able to do story times? Are we able to do maybe specific tours? Once a week we do have a tour that's geared towards families, that has touch objects and that has things that can really engage kids on the developmental level where they are, but also have something for their parents. One thing that was really great is we were able to work with a textile expert for our family day, and so she was able to talk about the history of textiles with the parents, and then had all of these touch fibers and fabrics that 2-year-olds are just able to touch everything. And it's like, yes, that's great. So thinking about how can we scaffold these experiences for young families, meet them where they are, and be useful, fulfill a need. Maybe y'all don't need another story time, and we'd love to hear that. And have it be a bit of a two-way conversation too. What can we do? How can we actually be useful? That's something that's really important, is really relevance and utility. If we just stay the way we are, where tourists come in for a tour of a nice looking old house, we will not survive. That is, I really firmly believe that. And so we need to be useful, we need to be helpful, we need to be involved in the community in a way that we're meeting needs, not just a way that we think we should be involved.
I can tell firsthand because we were walking around and we saw Kristen. She was like, "Come to our event," and our niece had a blast, they lit candles. And now, so every time she walks by, she's like, "Are they having a party?" So we actively seek activities for little kids, and so we can just tell her friends at school and stuff. So.
Oh, amazing! That's what we want. And we're also looking to partner with other museums and other institutions when we do this. We know that the Coastal Discovery Museum has a touch tank that they bring out. I want a touch tank in our garden. I want kids to be able to feel sea cucumbers outside of historic house. That's weird and crazy, and I love it. And then they get more of a STEM education, and also any kind of multi-sensory experiences. I'm very big on. I think the way that you can experience that in a house is so different than going into maybe a more universal encyclopedic museum where you see things behind glass and that's all fine and good. But when you walk into that space, you can feel it differently. And I think that is a feeling that goes across adults, children. People, for the most part, know what it's like to live in a domestic space. You know how a house functions. And so I think your ability to connect with historical people through that medium of a domestic space is pretty strong. And how can we use that to craft even more immersive experiences to really bring home, again, everything rooted in that humanity and understanding people and making connections either with historical people or with people in your present, in your community. It all comes back to people with whatever we do. Yes?
Questions, back to the champ.
Yeah.
So that's great. I thought, you're right. We go from the 19th century to after the ladies restored down the courthouse, and we don't really give any thought. How are you maintaining that connection beside the temporary or exhibition that's going to occur here, but keep that movement going? And are other museum directors and other places within the city mobilizing to tell that story of Savannah?
So first question, our goal is to, within the next couple of years, take one of the bedrooms that's on the bedroom level and reinterpret that to be the Chan's apartment, circa 1901, 1902. So that becomes a more permanent part of the story that we tell. And again, there are so many stories from the tenement time period. There's so much room for us to grow as an institution and do more research and tell more of those stories as they become available to us. And I think for a historic building, that's not something that's very common to see that, to do that, engage in that kind of interpretation. And it's more dynamic. It brings people in, it gives them a reason to visit us again and again and again. And so we're able to cultivate that, hopefully more through the programs, but if we can pull in the house into that too, that's just more opportunities to engage with people. As far as the larger community effort, I think there is a push towards trying to engage differently with people. And I think Ships of the Sea specifically is doing a good job with this. They're engaging way more with the maritime and shipping community, which I think is so smart and such a good idea, because they might not typically be an audience that you would associate as a museum going audience, but she is creating opportunities to meet them where they are and get them involved. And I think that's tremendous. And their new, the exhibition with the tattoos, also a cool modern twist on things. So I think there is a sense that we need to change. We need to be adaptable. We need to meet people where they are. We need to fulfill a need. We need to be more contemporary as historical institutions. And I think everybody's taking a different spin on that. And I'm excited to see where it all leads to. Because I think maybe we're on the beginning of something like this. And I'm just thrilled to be both a part of it and then also to see how can we support each other more as a museum community? That's been on my mind a lot lately, and I think that we're trying to take steps to be more collaborative in how we present history and how we represent our cultural institutions as a whole. And again, with tourism being down, we need to figure out better ways to work together to get people in our doors.
Is the city doing anything? Because there's so much talk about the increase in tourism and all the extra hotels and yada, yada, yada. And it seems, coming from a museum background, you museum house directors are all over the place and it's hard. You need a community.
Yeah, and I think, so I'll say the Coastal Museum Association has been a real boon and being a way for us to connect with each other. And I think the process that we're in now is we're actually put out a survey the other day to gather data. We want to collectively come to the city and come to more of the tourism side of things and say, you sell Savannah on its history. That's a big part of the messaging. We're the history. So how do we work better together?
That's the signal.
All right.
Thank you.